Okay, let us start this session. My name is Stein Sandven. I am leading this session together with the co-chair, which is Louise Mercer from Northumbria University. Can you see my screen now?
No.
Let me see.
Yep.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, let us start this session, and I will first give you some ideas of what we want to get out of it. I set up these 3 points. First of all, we will try to get some overview of the experiences we have had from different case studies of community-based monitoring and citizen science projects, basically in different Arctic regions. We also want to describe how these experiences best can be documented and shared between communities. And also, can we come up with some good suggestions how community-based observing can be strengthened in different Arctic communities? So first, I will introduce the CAPARDUS H2020 project. It's called Capacity Building in Arctic Standardization Development. It is a coordination and support action from starting in 2020 and will last to the end of 2023. We have about 9 partners and 4 subcontractors, as you see on the logos here. They are involved in different activities in the project. The objectives are threefold. First, we are working on building a framework for development, understanding, and implementation of Arctic standards. The second is to identify and document standards, guidelines, and practices within resource management, local community planning, and different economic activities like tourism. The third is to engage researchers, service providers, local communities, commercial operators, and governance bodies to design an Arctic practice system, building on the ocean best practice system. This figure shows this standardization continuum illustration, which we have built the project on. So this is always our first illustration to explain what we are trying to do. We have this continuum starting on the left side with ethics, norms, informal agreements, which are mostly traditions and mostly not necessarily documented in any way. It could be, but most of it is just traditions which is brought from generations to generations. Then we have, within the blue frame, we have the documented practices. This means it can be conventions, it can be reports on practices, technical specification, and international standards, and so on. These are usually documented in some way, and we are working in the project to look into what do we have of such documented practices and so on. And then we have further to the right, we have policies and legislation. That means that we are bringing up national policy documents that can be formal conventions. There are treaties, and even there are international law and national law, which is then much more formal and strict compared to the documented practices that we see in, for example, in many of the research work we are looking at. So we are conducting these case studies within natural resource management, tourism, safety, community planning, and decision making. CAPARDUS is working with these teams. It's already mentioned that we are looking into observing systems and data systems, community planning and decision making, natural resource management, shipping, tourism, safety, ethics, norms, responsible research, and other issues can also be addressed to some extent. It includes health, clean food, and water. To the right, we have three main pillars of the project. We have one group working mostly with community-based monitoring and citizen science. Another group is working with developing Arctic practice system. And then we have a group working with the socio-ecological system, which means they are developing a Bayesian belief network model for fisheries management, which we will not talk about today. We expect that this will come up in later workshops. So a few words about community monitoring versus citizen science. We often hear these two terms being used, and what do we actually mean? Are the difference between the two terms, or does it really mean the same thing? Community-based monitoring is defined by being basically established and driven by the local communities. And they usually are contributing with knowledge and interpretation, which only can come from the community members. And on the diagram down below, we have the upper line is autonomous local monitoring, where it means that all the red arrows shows that this is being taken care of by the local communities only. There are not necessarily any scientists involved. So the local community, they are working with design, observation, interpretation, and also management actions. If you go to citizen science, that means that this involves and very often are driven by scientists, but community members and citizens can contribute in different ways. So if you look at the diagram, it means that blue arrows suggest that it is a scientist who runs the project, and there can be collaboration and contribution from local communities and citizens. So the lower line, called scientist executed monitoring, is we have blue arrows all the way, which means that it's run by scientists and at different levels, but it can have contribution from local communities. So to say a few words about what we did in the INTAROS project, which was completed earlier this year, we made an extensive studies of different systems in different regions of the Arctic. And Finn Danielsen and his team in Nordeco and many of other collaborating partners conducted community-based monitoring surveys in the Arctic. And this has been documented in different reports. It is interesting to note that more than 170 CBM programs were identified in the Arctic. 45 of them were selected for analysis, and the results are available in several INTAROS reports and also publications. So it is commonly known that the topics for the CBM programs includes fisheries, forestry, herding and hunting, mineral and hydrocarbon extraction, shipping, and tourism. And it can be others. But it has to do, usually it has to do with important information that the communities need for their decision-making in matters which are important for them, for example, for food supply and safety. It's also noticeable that CBM programs are significant contributors to international environmental agreements and also to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This is just a slide showing that there is, during INTAROS, it was established a library where there are documents about some of those systems that we see on this list. And there is this website where you can go in and extract more information. There are, for example, manuals for how the CBM system work, and there are documentation of what are the best practices, and there are also recommendations for how to develop this further. And CBM and community-based monitoring is just not only in the Arctic. It is everywhere, and we can find examples which range from global scale to regional and local scale. And just to mention a few examples, if you go to the global scale, we have large programs like the GLOBE program, which has initiated and is supported by NASA. It is a lot about local observation of different parameters like clouds, land cover, and it is very often data needed to support satellite observations. Another example is the eBird network. This was established 20 years ago and is run by Cornell Lab for Ornithology. And this is an extensive now global observing system, perhaps one of the biggest, bird observing system, which has now been built up to a very advanced system where citizens can register observation, and it goes into a data archive and it is validated by scientists and so on. If we go to regional and local scale, we have the Pisuna program in Greenland. It's about management and living resources. And I think Finn will talk more about that later. And another example is from Svalbard region, where we have one such citizen science program is called Cruise and Science. It involves tourists in marine data collection during different cruises. And this is led by scientists at UNIS, the University Center in Svalbard. This is one example of data from eBird, which is in the Svalbard region. It is an example of records of Atlantic puffin, which is one of the species which are globally threatened. And observing these species is an important thing because it supports this World Conservation Union efforts to categorize and document vulnerable species. Another example is from Greenland, from West Greenland. This is an observing network which is part of the Pisuna system, and it's about observing marine mammals, fish, birds, land mammals. It's also about sea ice and climate and weather. So this is a very, I would say, basic observation that are recorded. As we see here, it's noted, and it is systematically reported and registered, so that over the years, this become very valuable information about these resources. And it helps to make decision about future quota and so on. Coming back to the Arctic cruise ships, this has been now demonstrated in different regions, and this is from Svalbard, where, as I said, UNIS, scientists and UNIS are running different activities, and they are collaborating with some of the cruise ships so that tourists are included in these observations. They are participating in the observations and learn how to do it, but the responsibility is with the scientists. Another important organization is this Arctic Expedition Cruise Operators, IECO. They are now an important organization for these kind of tourists that go on the expedition cruises. These are relatively smaller vessels, and they have a limited number of passengers, but they are exploring, that is in the name, they are exploring new areas in the Arctic. The organization was established in 2003. There are 63 international members. They have 57 operating vessels. They employ 1,500 guides. They have produced 64 guideline documents, and they are contributing to several citizen science programs in the Arctic. So they have been now increasing their efforts to support science. It means that they are offering scientists to participate in cruises. They are helping with teaching the tourists and giving them more, let's say, more information. And the tourists are then participating in the in the data collection and learn about the scientific work. Another example is cultural heritage research in the Arctic, and in particular in Svalbard. We had a couple of months ago in Kapardo's team, we had a workshop in Svalbard where we worked together with a group of people working with cultural heritage, and we learned about these very strong changes that are happening now because climate change has caused the increased erosion of the coastline. It has causing increased thawing of permafrost, and all these things have very rapid impact on the cultural heritage sites. And we see here on this figure, for example, this cableway station is getting, the shoreline is coming closer and closer, and the fear is that in a few years it will be broken down because the sea is coming all the way in and will undermine the whole building. So this is just one example of the problems that are connected to cultural heritage protection. Yeah, coming back to this IECO guidelines, it is important because in Kapardos we are studying guidelines, practices, and standards, and IECO has been very instrumental to develop guidelines for the tourists, and they have a long list of different guidelines depending on what you are doing and who you involve and so on. And tourist participation in this has become an asset for these companies. So the tourists, they really want to have this experience. They give very positive feedback when they are involved in this work. So it is expected that these activities, the citizen science activities, will increase in the coming years. And before I come to the end, just a few mentioning of some publication which have recently come out. Finn and his colleagues, and many of you have been involved here, is to produce this book called Community-Based Monitoring in Arctic, which give a very good review of practices that have been observed and analyzed in different regions. Then there are 4 scientific papers which came out in May last year, a special section in bioscience where these different aspects of the community-based observing systems were described in more detail. So I recommend that those of you who are interested should look more into these documents. And then coming up to the ocean best practice system, now we have I have got Jay is now helping us to make a diagram which illustrates how an Arctic practice system can be developed following the ocean best practice system, which have been around for many years. So it's interesting now that we have this Arctic collection of documents in repository, which is sort of growing, and we can discuss more of that later if you're interested. But in the end, we have this design of the Arctic practice repository. I think we will do more work on that now in the coming year, but this is I think this is as much as we have at the moment, and Jay may want to fill in more on this, but I think this is my last slide. So thank you. Let's see now how I do this. I should let me see. Okay, I stopped sharing. Okay, so Jay.
Could we address certain administrative matters for the session? Would that be okay?
Yeah, we can do it, but depending a little bit what is important. So please, Jay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you kindly. There is in the chat a link to sign in for the meeting, and we're asking all of the attendees to please put their information there. Secondly, eventually, Stein, we should take a photograph with everybody having their cameras on. We can do that whenever you choose. And the third question would be, would the presenters be willing to share their presentations with the participants after the meeting, or however it's preferred?
Very good. I hope everybody would like to share their presentation. So I think if somebody, well, you can tell me on the chat what you prefer. Okay. So I think the presentation will be by Nora Johnson, because Finn, he asked to change a little bit. He wants to come in a bit later. So maybe Nora, are you ready for your presentation?
Yes, I'm ready. I will share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen all right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that's great. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. It's morning where I am. I'm zooming in from Cambridge, Massachusetts in the eastern United States. And I want to just acknowledge that these are the traditional homelands of the Massachusetts and Patuxet peoples that I'm calling in from. I'm a research scientist at the National Snow and Ice Data Center, and I am sharing today from a case study that I am part of. My other colleagues who are involved with this case study are Olivia Lee and Nathan Kettle, who both are affiliated with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And we are contributing a case study from Alaska to the larger Copartis project. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've learned so far through this case study. We're focusing on the information sharing context for community-based monitoring programs in coastal Alaska. And we're looking at monitoring programs that are monitoring coastal erosion and permafrost. So those are generating a certain type of risk and hazard for coastal communities. And you can see in this image here, an example of the type of hazard that's resulting from the thaw of permafrost and erosion of the coastlines. And then we've also been looking at harmful algal blooms and monitoring programs that are focusing on harmful algal blooms. And that is a different type of hazard, but these are creating health hazards for communities, especially communities that are dependent on fishing and consuming shellfish. So I'll share a little bit about what we've learned so far. So we had 3 goals for this case study. First was to just identify some of the motivations for why communities are involved in monitoring coastal hazards. So we've been collecting some basic information like, what type of data is being collected, the methods used to collect the data, and how the observations are being used. And then we've also been trying to understand collaborations that exist among these programs, as well as the interest of programs in having more coordination and more collaboration. And this is sort of a step towards thinking about standards and standardization and how this might apply to community-based monitoring programs. So we've asked some questions about the protocols, tools, and practices used, as well as interest in a shared web-based portal for shared practices. So we're trying to understand the interest of programs in doing more coordination and more sharing around practices. So our methods, we began with a document analysis where we looked at existing documents. Many of them were gray literature, so not academic literature, but looking at reports and workshop summaries and other types of documents that were discussing the context for coastal erosion, permafrost thaw, and harmful algal blooms monitoring. And then based on what we learned about the programs that exist from that analysis, we then did interviews with 13 programs that represent, all of these different types of focus for community-based monitoring. And the next step, we're at the point where we've summarized what we've learned from these 2 phases of our project. And the next step will be to invite programs to come to do focus groups for small virtual workshops where we'll discuss what we've learned and sort of further refine and get additional input from the programs that we've interviewed so far, as well as from some additional programs. So far what we've learned about the motivations of these programs, communities are involved for many reasons in monitoring, but the largest interest of programs is to respond to community needs for information and community requests for information. So for the harmful algal blooms programs, this is really about understanding connections between the environment and the health of people. Also collecting baseline data and archiving long-term change. And that's true for both harmful algal blooms as well as coastal erosion focused programs. Also trying to understand regional comparisons and contributing to local and statewide change assessments. So some of the programs are more networked and looking at a regional level than others. A focus of all of the programs was a application of information in decision-making and planning, as well as increasing competitiveness for grants, enabling data sharing, and understanding scientific processes. So I'm not going to go into detail on this, but we can share our slides with everyone, and you can have refer back to this if you're interested. But we did collect information about the specific phenomena being observed and monitored, as well as some of the collection methods used to collect observations and data. And I will just note that the methods are really diverse. So, some programs are using scientific instruments, others are capturing information through photos or even unstructured narrative reports of what's being observed. And then we asked about how the observations are being used, and we learned that data is being shared with a range of organizations. The biggest focus was on communities. So use of observations by tribes and cities in particular was mentioned by many of the programs. But also programs were sharing data with co-management organizations and agencies, state and federal agencies, the general public, and scientists. And they supported a range of uses. So hazard mitigation and adaptation planning was a major focus in terms of use, but also, focusing and supporting policy and budget decisions. And there were some examples that people were able to give of how specific decisions were supported through the observations that they were sharing. And then we asked about collaboration with other community-based monitoring programs. So these programs are connected in a variety of ways. The harmful algal blooms programs have a statewide network that is very active, and so they have a higher level of connection among the programs than the permafrost and coastal erosion programs do. But the programs reported that they consulted with one another on data collection protocols, how to overcome specific challenges. For example, one challenge was for the HABs monitoring, in shipping samples to get the samples processed, because a lot of the communities couldn't do that work themselves. So improving, how to package and preserve samples so that they could get to the lab on time and be able to be processed. They consulted with each other about how to standardize certain procedures, how to share data and store and aggregate data. And then other areas were, collaboration around graduate student research. So some students were involved in supporting more than one program or doing research on more than one program, joint proposal writing, lab analysis, and testing training. But they also reported some challenges around collaboration, and in particular, just noted that there's a lot of diversity in the types of protocols used and in how the programs are designed, and that community-based programs really need to maintain that flexibility. So because the contexts are diverse and they're very embedded in the specific needs of the community. So that's a challenge that was raised that people mentioned around sort of deepening collaboration with across the different programs. And then they also we asked and they shared about how they collaborate with agencies and other institutions. So I mentioned that there's a statewide network for the harmful algal blooms, and that network has been very valuable. Many of the member programs mentioned its value in supporting networking, sharing, and learning, and also connecting the programs to sort of statewide and national databases where they can share the toxicity data. And then other agency collaboration, learning from agencies and agency expertise about the different protocols for monitoring. And again, the support for lab toxicity testing. So sending samples to state labs where they could be processed. And then providing training and quality assurance plans for some of the monitoring programs. So this is a diagram that just sort of illustrates the context for collaboration among these programs. So we had initially wanted to develop a map of the information sharing ecosystem so that we could really sort of better illustrate and understand how and where information is shared. But when we went about doing that, we realized that the map that we were developing was very complex and actually too messy to really be able to map in detail all of the different points of connection. So this is more of a just an illustration that shows where we've seen the best opportunity for standards that might be shared. And so you can see here the different types of programs, the coastal hazards, erosion, and harmful algal blooms. And then they're connected with the federal and state agencies. Subsistence harvesters were another user of some of the information coming out of these programs. And then on the left side, the yellow circles represent the different activities that were highlighted where there's been some coordination and collaboration across different programs. And then to the left, you can see a subset of those activities are the ones that we've identified as having the highest opportunity for standards. So that includes data collection tools and protocols, support for data integrity and respecting data sovereignty, data sharing, so both over the long term as well as intermittent sharing, trainings, training observers, and lab testing. Sorry, there we go. And then, so these are some considerations for standards and standardization that we identified and through the interviews. One is that protocols really need to be customized, as I mentioned, to meet community needs. And part of that is a process of developing relationships. So the local context, local capacities, and the relationships within the community are really important to community-based monitoring programs. Other considerations that are context specific are, not all communities have the same level of internet availability. Staffing levels are really different and experience. The infrastructure varies a lot from community to community. So some have labs where samples could be processed in the community, and others, for example, have to ship samples out of the community. And then communities also provide a lot of feedback about data collection. So, they often inform where sampling takes place and how it should be done, as well as what to sample, because the foods that communities rely on vary a lot. So some communities will harvest certain species more than others. So you can see that there's a lot of range in and variety in the needs for monitoring in the local context. Communities said that observing protocols need to be simple to use, and they also have to align with testing criteria that's specific to HABs monitoring. And then other considerations are they want protocols that are effective. There needs to be availability of funds for training so that they can do them the correct way. And then, some developing protocols has to recognize legacies of previous data that's been collected and the need to be able to maintain data collections over time, as well as timeliness. So, they need to be able to collect and process samples in a certain time frame. And then finally, accuracy of the protocols was important to communities. And then we asked about sort of observations and tools for storing and sharing the observations. So we learned that communities are using a range of tools. Some are using, mobile data collection apps. Others are not, but upload their observations later to a website. Some of them are already using data portals and databases. And then some are connecting to national level databases, and others are maintaining their data at a more local or regional scale and not trying to share at that national level. A lot of people use a spatial element in their web portal interface in order to identify where the observations are being collected. Some concerns about a web-based platform. There were concerns raised about security and safety of data and ensuring Indigenous data sovereignty. Also interoperability between collection and sharing systems. So for example, if you're using an app on a handheld device, it needs to be interoperable with the larger system so that data can be transferred easily. Dedicated funding for a coordinator to support the platform so that they recognize that a lot of times things are, there are these initiatives that are set up and then eventually the project ends, the funding ends, and they're not maintained. So, just recognizing that a web-based platform needs to have a dedicated source of funding to continue into the future. And then they also, were concerned about whether observations at the local level are really scalable into a larger database or a larger web-based platform, and recognize that resources are needed to update effective practices. So not just maintaining the platform, but also adding new practices to the platform as they become relevant. And then just some last thoughts from, these are direct quotes from some of the, this is a direct quote from one of the interview participants. They said, I feel like that conversation, the conversation about standardization, has been going on for a long time, and we're having the same conversation with just slightly different groups of people. And I haven't seen it advance. What is needed is trying to bring in the community members, the planners, the people who are going to use the data, and not just the scientists. Maybe the thing that could help this conversation is to move it away from just being an academic conversation to making it a practical conversation at the local scale. It seems top-down driven rather than bottom-up. So that's just a final sort of comment and observation about this question about standardization and how to connect to communities in the right way. And we just want to end by acknowledging the program leads who took the time to talk to us during the interviews, and also support from the Copartis project. Thank you, Stein.
Can everybody see it? Okay.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, sweet. And can you see my presentation?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. So I'm Louise and I'm a PhD student at Northumbria University. Yeah, and I'll be giving this presentation today to kind of show what I've been working on kind of in the first year of my PhD, where I'm really trying to understand like what is feasible in a short kind of project, and I'll be presenting a kind of a case study I've been working on. But also I spent some time with a community-based monitoring program, and just to gain some practical experience in it. So I'll kind of show you a little bit of my insights from that as well. Okay. So I was the early career co-chair at the Arctic Observing Summit with the capacity sharing working group, and that was back in March. And I really wanted to use some of the takeaways from that to shape my research going forward. So just some key things for the statement was for Indigenous communities to determine their own research priorities, and then more support is required for early career researchers, and kind of more understanding about bridging functions between like Indigenous knowledge and scientific research processes, and also a real emphasis on building an understanding about the value of capacity sharing, because when we had a lot of conversations, there was a lack of consensus of what capacity means and how that can be kind of intertwined into the capacity sharing process. So yep, that's just a few things. So this is my PhD to date. So I had the capacity sharing working group involvement. I then went to community meetings in March. And that was really just for me to kind of initiate contact with the community and to just kind of have early dialogue that I'll be working with. And that's Tuktoyaktuk in the Nunavut settlement region, but I also attended meetings in Aklavik as well. I then went back in June for further meetings, and I stayed. So I spent from June to August in Tuktoyaktuk. And that gave me kind of, it gave me time to just be present in the community and just listen and learn. So I spent the whole month of June kind of listening and learning and just kind of building a relationship with the community. And then I also gained practical experience in community-based monitoring. And then at the end of summer, I used this to work with an Indigenous researcher, Diva, to develop my kind of own little pilot study based on what I had learned over summer. Yep, so this is Tuktoyaktuk. It's in the Nunavut settlement region in northern Canada. And that's where I spent my whole a lot of this year actually. So I spent a lot of time with different community members and just kind of taking part in culture activities I was invited to. And this gave me like time to understand what their research priorities were, but kind of in an informal setting. And I really valued my time with them and just getting to know them, and like what their concerns were, and how they viewed research as well was quite interesting. And then I gained some practical experience with the community-based monitoring program there, which is the Tuktoyaktuk Community Climate Resilience Project, which was set up in 2018. And they've recently been awarded the Arctic Inspiration Prize. So what I was really interested in, so they are no longer limited by funding, which is a kind of, as you're all aware, that does limit community-based monitoring programs. So I'm kind of interested in, so when funding's not like an issue, like what is? So yeah, I gained a lot of experience just going out with them. They monitor all year round. So they do active permafrost, they do take water samples. They do quite a lot of different variables. So it gave me a really kind of, good introduction to community-based monitoring. And so like this is a kind of a model of where the program is moving to with after being awarded more funding at the beginning of the year. So like recently, since 2018, it was initiated through the co-development with the community. So it was based around community priorities. And there was this initial like training of monitors and training in different methods for data collection, but kind of there wasn't like kind of feedback. There was no constant feedback or further development, and it really struggled to go from data collection to kind of decision making, or just really progress past the data collection phase. So kind of like a few challenges they faced has been high staff turnover, also the community coordinator role as a sort of bottleneck to the program, because again, that links to the staff turnover, but as soon as the coordinator was absent, the program kind of stopped, which limited data collection, data like sample storage was effective, and they really lost a lot of data sets, and also no kind of updates to the methods or like refining of the methods. It has kind of stayed quite like generalized. It has like provided like great opportunities for the community, but like moving into the next phase of the program, they're really looking to focus their methods further by kind of creating more accessible and applicable monitoring sites to answer community priorities, but also use sites that are closer to town, because a lot of the sites right now are quite far away and they take the full day to reach. So that's kind of a next step. They want to engage with youth more and get them involved with the community-based monitoring, and really like narrow down what their goals are to answer specific questions. So rather than being a generalized kind of monitoring program, really hone down their methods so they can use the data to inform decision making, but also like have something to present at conferences and things like that as well. So yeah, so they're in a really kind of exciting phase at the minute, and it was like kind of great for me to get a better understanding behind that project as well. Okay, so now like there wasn't a big capacity sharing emphasis in the kind of program that I spent some time with. So that's kind of something I'm looking to try and implement into my research. So it's kind of this emphasis on kind of shifting from a one-way exchange process to a two-way exchange process. So how I did that, or trying to do that, is I co-developed like a small pilot study which focused on contaminant monitoring. So when I spent the time there over summer, that was like a big issue to community members. And yeah, like I've been working with an Indigenous researcher, Diva, on a 3-year funded project, and she has a full salary for 3 years. So we worked to make this project together, and it is just in its like initial stages and it will evolve over time. But we really wanted to understand if the contaminant threats posed by the legacy of transportation routes, industry, and waste in the community, which are kind of 3 areas of concern to community members. So this is a kind of model I found that kind of explains my process. So I engaged early with the community, and then I worked with Diva to develop like where the sample sites were going to be, but we also got feedback from community members who changed our sites or suggested other areas, and also gave us a lot of context of where we should be sampling and why, and that was really insightful. And then yeah, so this project I'm currently working on, it's a NUNA project, and that has provided like Diva, like an Indigenous researcher, with a job for 3 years, and it's a salaried position, so it doesn't just last over the summer months, which is quite common. It's full time, which gives her the opportunity to really like address skills that she wants to learn. So I spent a lot of summer just helping, like training Diva to understand different areas, different types of skills, and that was really embedded into our program as well, to really address what skills she wanted to learn as part of the program. For example, lab work, which she really wanted to get involved in. And then the kind of next, I really want to get like co-dissemination of the research. So using the kind of data that I've collected, we collected, we want to feed it back by next March. So we want to feed the results back, and then that will inform the next phase of our program development. So these are our monitoring sites. So we chose sites that had different aspects of kind of contamination threats. So we had different waste sites, different sites near industry, and different sites near road. And I really wanted to emphasize that the sites we chose are all accessible within the hour by car. So like it doesn't take a long time to reach, because that's something that I identified to be quite important from my time over summer. Yep, so we collected data, the water samples from these sites 4 times, and we did it before and after big storm events as well. Yeah, so this is just going back to like me trying to embed upskilling and kind of focus on skills that like what Diva wants to look at as well. So kind of included like we went over different sampling techniques, how to understand data quality. We spent a lot of time doing that. And scientific communication. Stephen wanted to get some more experience presenting at conferences, so we've been doing that, but this is all like over time. Over the next like 3 years we will be focusing on these skills, because she has the time to do that, and like these are kind of the areas that she wanted to focus on as well. Yep, so in my next part of my PhD, I will be presenting at chairing the capacity sharing session at ArcticNet, because one of the takeaways from the Arctic Observing Summit again was to really try to build a better understanding and creating the platform to have these kind of conversations. So I thought that was really important to create a session all about that, which I hope will be a great opportunity to discuss this topic further. I'm going back to TUC in March to kind of go over results, but also just to sustain dialogue as well, which I feel is quite important to my kind of program. And then in July will be kind of the initiation of the next iteration of the program based on feedback from the March trip. So just like as a PhD student looking at this kind of research, I found it very valuable, like because I've learned so much over summer, but it was quite challenging to do because I didn't have a project developed before my project approval, in terms of I had the initial funding, which enabled me to really get out there and just spend time learning, but that kind of faced some barriers at an institutional level because I did spend a lot of time not really knowing what my project was going to be, and it really got developed quite quickly, like in the last couple of months. So like not having that steering focus was quite challenging for a long time. And not everybody can do it. Like I was lucky to have a lot of support from my supervisors who let me use that time to just spend some time in the community over summer. So in my project, I hope to that a large emphasis is going to be placed on adaptability. So like kind of like the TCC that they started in 2018, and they've now moving to the next phase of the study or their program, but that's like 4 years later. So I really want to emphasize that the program develops based on feedback annually, and to adapt to changing research priorities, but also new information from the study as well. And I think that, for my research over summer, I think that funding does need to support early career researchers have that opportunity to get early dialogue with the community, but also go back with the results as well. Yeah. Okay, that's my project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. That was a very nice presentation. And I see that the time is running, and so I think we should just go on to the next presentation. And Finn, that's you.
Yes, that is me. Hello, everybody. I'll start with a big apology for coming late. Last night I was tested positive for corona, and then I was going to away from my family because they're not tested positive, so that I have to go in self-isolation, and then going here out in the province, the tire went flat, so I had to change the tire, and then I got too late in traffic. But I ended up being here, and I'm very happy I managed to get here. So can I share screen? Let's see. I should be able to share screen. I push share screen, yes, and then share. And then I should get my screen on there. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
That is in presentation mode. Can you also see me? Is it okay now?
Yeah, it's okay for me. I choose another, view option, but that's fine. I need to
fine. Great.
So just go ahead.
Excellent. Great. Thanks. So we are in the middle of preparing a workshop in Asiat in Greenland here 2 months from now, and I thought that the most useful contribution I can make today would be to put you inside our discussions for about some of the key topics that we are concerned about with regard to CBM in Greenland and in Arctic Russia right now, and some of the preparations for the workshop, where we are right now in those preparations. So, and instead of trying to go through all the lessons on CBM, I would like to focus on one: how to sustain community-based monitoring, and particularly with focus on the financial side, because there's also, of course, an institutional sustainability. There's also technical sustainability, but I'll like today to focus on just one: the financial sustainability of community-based monitoring programs. So that I'll do in the first part of this presentation, and then in the second part, I'd like to share with you our thoughts about prospects for a global guideline, or at least a guideline on community-based monitoring, and where we are with those thoughts right now. So hoping very much to get feedback from you today or later on in the coming days. So for those of you who are not aware of it, in Greenland, the main community-based monitoring program is PISUNA, Piniakinik Sumifini Nalasuinek, which means opening doors to local knowledge and local documentation for management. And it's I'll quickly share with you what it's about before we go into the discussions of financial sustainability. So basically, the government have invited communities that are interested to look after resources that they, the village leadership, they call in those fishermen, farm hunters, and others that are particularly knowledgeable about natural resources, and ask, are you interested in looking after resources and reporting to us what you're seeing? And so a group of 5 to 8 fishermen and hunters, they themselves decide what to look for. Then they meet together around a table in the community, facilitated by a local volunteer coordinator, every 3 months, and they discuss how is it going with the resources. For instance, eiderduck, is that becoming more plentiful, less plentiful? Is it the same, or we don't know? Comparing it with the same area, same time of the year 1 year ago. So is there a difference? If there is a difference, is it an important difference or not? And if it's an important difference, what could be the reason? And is there something that needs to be done about it? who should do what and when. And these management proposals for what needs to be done with the supporting evidence are then sent into the municipal authorities every 3 months. And some of the proposals are then used by municipal authorities or even sent up to central government for proposed decision making. At the same time, this information is transformed to English and put on PisunaNet with the help of the local people. And so that anybody who's interested, including the fisheries committee at national level, can with just 2-3 keystrokes access and say what are the perceptions of community members about what's going on with resources in this particular area, and what do they suggest needs to be done. And the coordinator of Adu community, Nunok, he received the Nordic Council Environment Prize for their work. The other program is that I'm going to talk about is Yakutia community-based monitoring, which is in Arctic Russia and Siberia. And there we've been working with 2 indigenous people organizations. They have engaged communities and district and government people in developing a monitoring program there, which is very much using the same approach as in Greenland. And it has helped put this Russian government regulation territories of traditional land use into concrete practice on the ground. And it has contributed to protect rights of indigenous people to utilization of natural resources, which is quite different from what a lot of people like me as an ecologist think that monitoring is about. So it's not only monitoring for looking after resources and for improving the governance of resources, but actually also here used to protect the rights of indigenous people to access the resources. And some of the examples of the outcomes there has been rights that has been that community members there have gotten rights to a traditional fishing ground. They've gotten the changes to permitted net types because they could show that they were only allowed to hunt to catch fish in the upper 2 meters near the surface of the water in rivers, but they could show that with the very, very hot summers, there was no fish up there. They went lower, so they were allowed to fish with setting the nets lower, and they got help to protect against their reindeer against brown bear attacks. There were development of hunting quotas for wild reindeer, and they got the authorities to start monitoring the water quality in the creeks, and there were a number of concrete outcomes on the ground that benefits the sustained use of resources by the indigenous people there. So that was a quick intro to the 2 community-based monitoring programs. So in terms of this challenge sustaining the government programs, in Greenland, the organizer has been from the beginning the Ministry of Fisheries at central government level. But in practice, we've seen that their interest is a little bit diluting. And today it's really the local government that is pushing this program forward. And it's mainly one community now that is doing it because the other communities have lost interest. Probably we think it's because they don't see that the central government is acting on the recommendations that are coming in. And then the work has been assisted by, you could say, academics, by us in Nordeco, as well as Nor and her group in Oloka. So the funding first came from central government, and now it's the Kagatalik municipality who are providing honorarium to community members, symbolic though, but it is still important, as well as paying for the staff time of one municipal employee as facilitator of the work. And in Yakutia, it's very different because the organizer is really the indigenous people organization, the one called Riposh, which is an indigenous people organization in this part of Russia, and is then assisted by Center for Support of Indigenous Peoples of the North in Moscow, based in Moscow, and as well as Nordeco. So the funding there comes from international bodies. I mean, it's been coming from the EU until February this year, and a little bit also from philanthropies, international philanthropies. So, and there's a strong wish to develop that further. There's a number of other parts of indigenous people organizations in other parts of Arctic Russia that are really keen on starting up on this as well. And just, you know, there was a large workshop in Moscow just before we had to stop the funding because of the political situation. But the key message from that workshop was that we really need to develop a Russian information platform to put the various initiatives on community-based monitoring in Russia more together. But that has, of course, been set on hold now. So this very difficult financial situation in terms of sustaining community-based monitoring programs, both in Greenland and in Russia, is actually not unique to those two areas. We also heard it in the previous talk that is a major concern. And when we did this review of Arctic community-based and scientist-executed monitoring programs a couple of years ago with many of us that are present today, and with Noor and Olivia and others involved, we saw that if you had put the community-based monitoring program here in orange and the scientist-executed monitoring programs in blue, and look at what is the access to funding they have, it's the median of the community-based is really very far away from the scientist-executed monitoring programs. The scientist-executed monitoring programs are suffering, but the community-based monitoring programs are suffering even more so. So there were these A, B, C, D, E, F that this was a self-assessment by facilitators of monitoring programs across the Arctic, and you could go and the question 3.2 in this questionnaire said funding support, assess the long-term financial support that underpins the measurement program, and it went from no dedicated funding support at all, A, up to project-based funding, B, and up to sustained infrastructure support, as well as support for active research and development of tools. And you see that B is where the CPM programs median were, whereas the scientists were on E. And it's was based on 44 scientists executed and 30 community-based monitoring programs. So it's really something that really matters, and it means that you have these islands of projects that run, and then there's no longer anyone when the funding runs out after 3 years. There's no longer anyone to keep it all together, and it falls apart, and you start again. And maybe that's part of also the reasons that some of these discussions, like Noor mentioned in her presentation, some of these discussions about linking, connecting, it begins and then it dies out, and begins, it dies out. So sustained financial support is really crucial for these things to really grow. So the current funding models for CPM programs in the Arctic, I'm trying to get my head around that in advance of this workshop we have in Asia in Greenland next year, to get an overview of what is exactly are the funding opportunities. And we've got individual grants from government. For instance, I think the Inevaluate community-based monitoring program is one of those cases. Typically, it's funding through scientists, actually. So, for instance, Lisa Losetto gets money from Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, and she then channels some of the funding on to do CPM work in OBPS. It's not even going to the communities themselves directly. Another one is individual grants from philanthropies and international bodies to local civil society organizations, such as, this is an example of how it is in Yakutia. Then you have examples where, like Olivia's work in AAOKH in Alaska, where their work is financed by penalties from polluters. Or you have programs where the surplus from mineral exploration and exploitation, for instance, the fees paid by mining companies are then used to fund CPM programs. I think an example of that is Marion Watershed in Canada. And then you also have in other countries international support from governments through annual appropriation based on a policy. And actually, Greenland, we have that is an objective level of the wildlife law from 2009 in Greenland, saying we have to listen to user knowledge. but it has not yet been transformed into a Bekendtgørelse, an implementing guideline which is necessary if you have to set money aside for it. So, but these last 3-4 bullets, that would be sustained infrastructure support, and these are the kind of things that I think we would want to go for. If you know of other than this, it would really be wonderful to hear about that. So, what are then the solutions in Greenland and Russia? Well, so far we think that in the Greenland CBM program, the sooner, one way would be to try and scale up grants from international bodies to local civil society organizations. But to do that, we need to establish a local civil society organization. And there's effort on the way to do that in Attu right now. In Yakutia, that's really, really hard. We don't know the situation right now there with the increasing international crisis, and it's really hard to know what happens there. We have a meeting here 2 weeks time with the Russian partners to discuss this. Suggestions are of course welcome. Moving then on to the second part of my presentation, the prospects for a global guideline. I would like to share with you this Manaus letter, which is a list of 40 recommendations for participatory monitoring of biodiversity that were developed by more than 200 participants from 18 countries, including Alaska and Greenland, Sweden, Denmark, in over a 1-year period in Manaus in Brazil back in 2014. And it was really developed at an invitation of the Convention on Biological Diversity Secretariat. And what exactly is this about? Well, let me give you an example here. This is the topic about data quality and management. And it says here, recommendation 13, data quality is fundamental if participatory monitoring of biodiversity is to achieve its objectives. It's therefore essential that data collection be standardized at the necessary scale among monitors, among communities, and among initiatives if the scale of monitoring is regional or global. Or move down to recommendation 18. Use and application of monitoring data should respect the characteristics, limitations, and restrictions inherent in the data. So it's actually quite, a lot of thoughts went into this. And so before the meeting today, we tried then to go through all the different sub-themes in this Manaus letter from 2014-15, try to look at how many of these are still relevant of these recommendations under each sub-theme, and how many of them are outdated or we don't know. And I'm actually quite surprised that we had the sub-themes: design, community participation, institutional arrangement, data quality. I just presented that. Links to public policy, recognition of the communities, institutional strengthening, capacity building, communication and outreach. And actually, almost all of them are still relevant as far as I can see, and my colleagues can see. There's one of them, perhaps one of communication, that is outdated, and this is, or at least, or maybe it's unclear. It's recommendation number 14. It says local, traditional, and indigenous knowledge used in and produced by biodiversity monitoring should be systematized and made publicly available, ensuring that there is consent among the knowledge holders. And that's a little bit, I think it's a little bit vague, and I'm not sure made public. Made publicly available, but only within, as long as the communities behind it supports that it's publicly available. And that's probably what is meant by the last part of the sentence. So that's one of these where I think over these 5-8 years, we've learned more about how to go about these things, I would think. And so that's perhaps missing some of these beautiful developments that have happened over the last years, like and a better understanding of indigenous data sovereignty maybe needs to get in there if that should be developed as some sort of guideline. Maybe there's also been developments in terms of digital platforms and other cyber infrastructure for cross-weaving. Some of that Nord mentioned earlier in her presentation. Also, there's a lot of work that's gone on how to link it with international agreements, such as tracking the Sustainable Development Goals. Also, the concept of community observatories have begun to come up. This idea that instead of having at the community level, community-based monitoring of environment, community-based monitoring of health among communities, and maybe community monitoring of other aspects. And you should not have these as silos. It should be more community observatories that looked at all these different things. So maybe that needs to be reflected, I don't know. Also, another one is these recent developments about linking with governance monitoring, so that instead of only monitoring environment, maybe also connecting it with monitoring of whether the government is delivering on what it's promising to do through use of citizen scorecards and things like that. Social accountability monitoring, maybe something about that needs to be considered. Also, that it's no longer, I mean, there's actually 4 academic literatures that talk about environment community-based monitoring, not only citizen science literature, but also adaptive management literature, that and common property literature. That's very much, the literature developed by Elinor Ostrom, the Nobel Prize winner in economics a number of years ago, as well as this literature on democratic accountability. So it's actually a lot of different literatures that 4 different literatures that one needs to keep in mind, and maybe that also needs to go into the Manaus letter somehow. I don't know. And also that there's policy support from several environmental agreements, new ones also that we did not have a number of years ago. So, for instance, there's an Arctic Fisheries Agreement saying that in the Central Arctic Ocean, decisions on resources need to be built both on scientists executed monitoring and indigenous and local knowledge. And one of the ways of getting local knowledge into making it more useful for decision making is through community-based monitoring. And there's also a new one with UNESCO and open science guidelines talking about these things that has come to the area. And there's also a number of recent technological developments where that's developing rapidly with regards to environmental monitoring, also in the Arctic. eDNA, machine learning, artificial intelligence, drones, underwater, above water, image recognition, voice recognition, tracking of individual animals. You have these rapidly expanding platforms like iNaturalist and eBird. And they're not, some people think that they are then taking over. There's no need for community-based monitoring, but it's different things that they're doing. And there's something to talk about another day. But maybe some of that has also an influence on the Manaus letter. If we are to take the Manaus letter, maybe convert it into try to make that a global guideline or Arctic guideline, if that's something we want to do on community-based monitoring, if it's at all possible and useful. So that was some thoughts from my end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Finn. That was a lot of interesting points for the discussion. We are running not quite out of time. We have about 10 more minutes. I think we can spend those 10 minutes on comments and questions. I think we just do it already now. So if you raise your hand, if you want to say something, then we can just talk.
So I can start with saying there were a number of questions in my presentation where I really would like to hear feedback on. So why don't I ask Louise and then afterwards Nor for their thoughts on this.
Okay, one specific question.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, which specific question would you like me to answer? Sorry.
Yeah, that is about financial. How do we get, are there other models for financial sustaining CPM programs?
Yes.
Yeah, have you come across, and I think this is a bit unfair to ask Louise about, but so anybody love to hear their feedback on that.
Yeah, so like the TCCRP, the project I was working on, it did have a time limited grant. So it was a grant, then there was very time limited. They had 4 years to do it. I think it was a Canadian grant program. I can't remember the name. I think it was for one of the for the North by the North grants. Yeah, but it's limited. But then they applied and they got the Arctic Inspiration Prize. And the brilliant thing about that is they don't have to use it within a certain time. So they can really focus on areas they want to develop further, but like they've got many years, so they don't have to use all the money. I think it's like 500,000. It's a big grant, but like they don't have to use it up within 5 or 10 years. They can really make sure they, you know, put the infrastructure in place and the people in place to help it kind of run for a long time. And I think that's a key aspect, is not having to use like everything up within like 2 or 3 years, because yeah, like that, like they initiated the program and they spent so much money kind of on training, which was really important, but they didn't really have any more money left to keep on training new monitors when the other staff left, and that was a big problem. So now like a big emphasis is going to be on like, you know, keeping funds to ensure training goes over a long period of time, because staff turnover is huge. So yeah, but I think another thing I looked at, like, so there's the new program, the Canada, like the CINUC program. That's another program I'm working on, and they're kind of like a different, I think they were supposed to be like a different funding structure. So it's kind of, we're not looking at that, the kind of box checking of funding organizations, like, and they did really like, they had money available to really initiate relationships before the program was developed. And I think that's really like, that would, like, you know, building a program around research priorities of the community. I think that, you know, because that really, getting that community investment is really important. Anyway, I've spoken for too long. Yeah. You want to go?
Oh, that's really useful. Thanks a lot, Louise.
No, that's okay. Thanks.
Finn, can I make a comment that we can extend a little bit of time if people are available? Because I know we're running out of time. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, good question, Finn. You know, this is always one of those questions that maybe will never go away. But I think, you know, some people have pointed out that you can look at community-based monitoring as sort of a symptom of disinvestment from the government. So, you know, if the government is committed to monitoring and supporting monitoring, that's one thing. And then if the government says, well, let's let the citizens do it, they can do it, and then we don't have to pay for it, that's, you know, a good model. So I think we have to keep in mind that the government really should play a role in supporting ongoing monitoring. And if we want communities to really be able to be involved, of course, we can learn from a different model of having the government provide funding. So I think now we have an opportunity to remind governments that they need to fund monitoring, and we also have growing capacity and interest from communities to really play a role in directing that and leading that. So I do think, you know, that's a really important part of the puzzle. And then we also have some of these really big foundations that have a huge amount of money and a lot of power that comes with that money. And so again, you know, there needs to be some accountability and questioning of these huge funders who can just decide, because by you know, putting their money where they're interested, they can really shape the direction of democracy and other things. But you know, they do have a lot of resources. So I think what Louise was saying is true. If, you know, if we can kind of create some interest from these larger funders in supporting monitoring in a larger way, that could be really helpful. But another thing I think we need to remember is that there's this space in the middle between the funders or the researchers or the, you know, sort of the international community that's interested in observing and communities. And the space in the middle is sort of this effort to coordinate and to link programs And I think there's a need to focus on capacity at that level as well. Because once communities are better linked and coordinated, then they can maybe apply more pressure on funders and say, you know, well, we have good funding over here, but our colleagues in these other communities could really use some support. Can we find, you know, some resources? Can we help direct resources to these other communities that maybe haven't won an Arctic Inspiration Prize, but are doing good work or are interested in building more capacity. So I think that we need to pay attention to different levels when we're thinking about the funding discussion.
Thanks for all these great points. Thank you very much. Really useful. Are there others that want to share thoughts on this?
Yeah, maybe I could just mention one example, another example in Svalbard, because with the growing tourism industry and tourists are start to have a big, you know, impact on the environment. There is this environmental tax from tourists, and they already have this system in Svalbard. They pay into a fund, and this fund is now used, for example, they clean beaches for plastics and things like that, but it could also be used for, you know, like CBM, but it means that you have to have a possibility to impose this tourist taxation regime. I don't know how that would be in other places, but in principle, it's something that you could look more into.
Very useful, very interesting. That good point was great.
Okay, I think we are coming to an end, but Jay, you have something more that, and we could sit a little longer. Is that what you think?
I was asking a question, Stein, about can we define globally the 2 or 3 most challenging aspects of CBM as sort of an element of reporting out from this session? What are the major challenges among all the groups that are here? And I won't say how to address them, but let's talk about that or think about it.
Yeah,
And then,
that's. I think it's good. We already have had some discussion on the funding issue, which is, I think, is quite common. Another thing, I get now the impression that we really need to improve, you know, this sharing of information to know about each other, especially now there is so much going on. And if we can improve exchange of, you know, just know more about each other, have a system. This is a little bit, you know, the background why we are talking about an active practice system, you know, is like a digital system to make it easier to find out what's going on, what are the others doing, what are the documents available, and things like that. So I am again thinking about how to improve the exchange of information about things that is maybe not common for everybody, but for many groups, they have certain things they need to discuss. And then if you have a platform to go and find information, that would help.
Maybe this is what the Inuit Circumpolar Council is planning to do with the update of the arcticcbm.org platform. I would think maybe Noah can say a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, so the arcticcbm.org, I think, was created in around, we started working on that in 2012. And the last time it was updated really was in 2016. And so I think this actually speaks to some of the comments that were made by the folks that we interviewed for this Copartis case study, which is just to say that you can develop a tool of practices, but if you don't have capacity and ongoing focus to keep it updated and to add new practices, or in this case, add new CBM programs, then that tool quickly becomes outdated. So ICC is leading an effort to do an update of the Arctic CBM Atlas, and will be, I think pretty soon ready to send out a questionnaire to gather, you know, new examples of programs, as well as updating from the older projects. And then part of it also will be revisiting the Atlas as a tool and trying to find ways to make it easier to search the Atlas to find projects that have similarities in terms of either approach or how they're involving community members, or similar types of phenomena that they're observing. So it'll be hopefully an updated interface as well. That's in the works, and hopefully will be ready next year for kind of a public release, a 2.0 release.
Can I add another thing? Pauline and I are working with the EU PolarNet. In particular, there's a platform called Catalyst, which in fact is meant to be for sharing information on the Arctic. It was started 2 months ago, is just in its beginning phases. But one exciting opportunity is that the group that Louise has been working on, the capacity sharing in the AOS, has now expressed interest in working with the Arctic Practices System, OBPS also, to have a capacity sharing hub in which all of the various methods in the Arctic can be included for capacity development, capacity sharing. And we're just starting that. Pauline is putting links into their site so they can access ours, and they're going to be contributing to the APS prototype or pilot in the OBPS. Pauline, do you want to say anything else that I've missed on Catalyst?
No, I think that's good. It's very much embryo at the moment, but it can move quite quickly. So we should see something hopefully within a week or two, something on the Catalyst platform.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this was very nice. I think we are coming to an end, and unless Jay, you have something urgent, I think we should stop. I just want to ask, how do we share our presentations? Do we send it? Can we upload it somewhere? Because I'm not familiar with this nice tool that you are using. How should we do it?
Do you want to collect them, Pauline?
Yes, you can either send them to me directly, or you have when you came in to this particular session, you will see that there's a Google folder linked. Can you see that? And in that Google folder, if you click on that, just upload them into that Google folder.
Where do we see that Google folder?
Yes, Olivia is saying she's just uploaded hers. Do you want to explain it, Olivia? Because you've actually just done it. So you go to the Arctic Practices session on KikoChat. So as you came in, you had to click on the Join Arctic Practices. And against that is, I tell you what, let me just give me one moment and I will send you the folder.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's good. If you send us just the link to the folder, then we can easily upload there.
Yeah.
I will.
Okay.
There's a daily or every other day newsletter that comes out from the workshop summarizing different sessions. I'm wondering if you can put together a paragraph on the discussions and outcomes. And that goes to Pauline.
Yeah.
I did take notes during the meeting, so there's a reasonable, I hope reasonable set of notes.
Yeah.
One never knows, that you can use, but it's important to give this visibility. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll do something and send to Pauline tomorrow.
Thanks a lot, Stein. That would be wonderful.
Okay, very good. I think that's all for today. So thank you very much to all of you. And we have exciting times ahead of us. So we'll keep going. Lots of things are happening in Kapardus as well now. So I think we will have another busy year. But I'm still waiting for feedback from the EU on the extension of the project. But I hope that's just a formal thing. It's nothing difficult. It's just a formality. So I'm working on it. Okay, then I can stop recording, I guess.